Hi everybody, welcome back to English 112. This is for our class for Tuesday, the 22nd. And as I'm sure you're aware, Thursday is Thanksgiving, so we will not be having a class on Thanksgiving. But I wanted to talk about A Raisin in the Sun today. And you can see in the notes below, I have a few clips for you to watch. The first clip is from ABC News. It's approximately 3 minutes long or so, and it's about a 2014 production that was done of A Raisin in the Sun. Now, you watch the definitive Sidney Poitier film version, and it's considered definitive because Lorraine Hansberry herself worked on that film adaptation. But this was a Broadway revival on the exact same stage where the original play was actually performed prior to the filming of A Raisin in the Sun. So that 3-minute clip will give you a little bit of a sense of that particular production and some of the actors involved, including Denzel Washington, an A-list Hollywood actor. Then there's another 3-minute clip I wanted you to see about some autobiographical information about Lorraine Hansberry herself. And what you will find is that A Raisin in the Sun is a loosely autobiographical play. And then finally, I wanted you to watch a 4-minute clip going back to the 2014 cast of the production A Raisin in the Sun with Denzel Washington, talking about the themes of race and class within that particular production. And there are many versions, obviously, of A Raisin in the Sun. At the bottom of our notes, I have a stage production that you could view. You are not required to, but you could view, and this is with Danny Glover from 1989. And in the 80s and 90s, he was quite the A-list actor himself. And one of the things you'll find with most productions is that they usually delete scenes, in part because of length, but also in part because of the economic cost of hiring an actor and an understudy, wardrobe, things of that nature. So the version that we saw with Sidney Poitier left out a few key scenes that I wanted to talk about, but while those scenes don't necessarily influence the plot, I think they're important thematically. And that Danny Glover version that I was mentioning does include those scenes, but you'll see that that particular production is just slightly under 3 hours. So this is a lengthy play. Nevertheless, whether or not you watch the Danny Glover production, I think that you will see that Lorraine Hansberry's film version is very true to the text itself. And that's because, again, she worked on it. She wanted it to be true to the text, and she used actually many of the actors who were performing her play on stage. And one of the ways that you could think about this particular play is the importance of names. Lorraine Hansberry is a very self-conscious author, so that's what I wanted to talk about today. And also to mention to you what $10,000 would mean in today's money. In 1959, $10,000 was a significant sum. Not to say that it's not a significant sum today, it is. But I did look it up, as I do every semester, and for 2022, that $10,000 would be the equivalent of $102,410. To give you an idea of the kind of magnitude that we're talking about. Again, in today's world, $10,000 is certainly significant, but not as significant as $102,000. So thinking about the names, because again, Lorraine Hansberry is a very self-conscious author. Mama. And obviously, she serves as the mama for the household. And there's some tensions between her and Ruth because of that. Because ultimately, Ruth is Travis's mother. But Ruth is living in Mama's house. So that tension of who has power, who has responsibility for the rearing of the child is something that we see throughout the play. One of the things I appreciate about this play is how realistic these characters are and how nuanced they are. We see lots of shades of gray, so to speak, and what we see are real people that have positive and negative qualities associated to them. And Mama definitely has many positive qualities. She's loving and she's the matriarch and she's strong, but she can also be viewed as domineering. She imposes her will on others, and perhaps she should. After all, it is her home. Certainly, we see this in terms of religion with the episode between Mama and Benita. And again, if Benita's living in Mama's home, then in theory, Benita should be listening to Mama's rules. But Mama is more than just a mama. Notice that her first name is Lena, and that's very significant because these characters lean on her for love, for shelter, for utilities, for food, for tuition money and hobbies even. Walter Lee Jr. And I think it's important that he's a junior because he's always living in the shadow of his father. In fact, at one point, Mama even says to him, I'm waiting for you to be the man that your father was. And he also, I think, is a character that we can view from his multiple nicknames, whether it be brother, which is... It makes sense that if you've got two men in the household with the same name, Walter and Walter, that they would have to be some kind of nickname or some sort of agreement on how to differentiate between the two. The idea of how brother is oftentimes used in the African American community, and that everyone happens to be brothers, or it can be used as a kind of greeting, I think is somewhat significant. But even more significant is the nickname Prometheus, which again George Murchison uses with with Walter, and Walter's not even sure if there is such a thing as Prometheus. There is. Prometheus is from Greek mythology. Basically, he stole fire from the gods, gave it to humanity, and he was punished accordingly for it, for all of eternity. And that hubris, that arrogance, something that we talked about with Oedipus the King, is something that we could see within Prometheus, but also see within Walter Lee. That was the insult that Asagai was trying to give him, that Walter Lee has this unlimited ambition and is willing to stop at nothing. In fact, Walter Lee steals, just like Prometheus stole. Walter Lee takes beneath a share of the money, as he tells Mama he never went to the bank and he never invested any of it. So what Walter wants, is a liquor store, and in many respects, what he wants is the American dream of owning his own business, of being financially independent, of being respected, of having his son become college educated. That's one of the scenes that oftentimes is deleted that I wanted to talk about. And he is punished accordingly for this hubris. Then we see Ruth Younger, and if you are aware of the biblical Ruth, that she was a long-suffering daughter-in-law, so I think that name suits her quite well in this particular play. Ruth is torn between her allegiance to her husband, Walter, but also her allegiance to her mother-in-law, especially because they have the same gender. And there are lots of themes that we see throughout this particular play. Definitely race and ethnicity is a major theme, but themes about gender, themes about class, themes about education are all embedded within this particular play. So it's very complex. It's very rich. So at one point, Ruth says towards the ending of the play, that she's willing to strap her baby on her back and clean all of the residences in Chicago. But prior to that, she's contemplating an abortion, which is particularly significant because not only does it also go in the face of the religious beliefs of the household. At that time period, the time period of the play, 1959, abortion was illegal. So she's willing to do something from her perspective that would be both illegal and immoral, coming from a religious background. Travis Younger, I think it's quite important that he's not named Walter. He could have been named Walter Jr. or Walter or Walter Younger III, I should say. He could have been named after his father, Walter Jr., and his grandfather, Walter. Instead, he has his own name, the idea that he has his own independence, and perhaps he will break out of the shadow of his family, perhaps even achieving more than his family could ever imagine. At the very beginning of the play, Travis talks about how he wants to carry groceries. We can see this as a positive because he's trying to earn money and contribute to the household. Or we could see this as a negative, that he's so young and yet he's so consumed with the idea of money. But again, we have to think about the father figure that he has to see every day. But a minor detail, for instance, when Travis decides not to go in with the rest of the family to buy Mama's gift, and that happened to be gardening tools, he decided to go off on his own. This sense of independence. In other words, that he's not going to be another Walter Younger. He's going to be Travis. It always strikes me that in terms of the ages, we'd have to fudge a little bit. But Travis would be near the same age of a Barack Obama in our time period. And as we know, Barack Obama was president of the United States, something that I don't think Lorraine Hansberry could have even dreamt as a possibility during the time when this play was written. And that's not to say that we don't struggle with issues of race and class and gender. We definitely do. But there also have been strides made since this play has appeared. Beneatha Younger, and her name sounds like beneath, and of course we can talk about how Beneatha is viewed as beneath others because they see her as being young, they see her as being poor, they see her as being female, and they see her as being black. However, Beneatha can also see others as beneath her, because she's intelligent, she's educated, and she's trying to be culturally aware. Again, we have characters with nuances. They aren't all positive or negative. They are combinations of the above. Her nickname, which I think is quite telling, that Asagai gives her, is Alayo, one for whom bread or food is not enough. In other words, the basic necessities are not enough for her. She aspires for more. And she's quite ambitious. She wants to be a doctor, a very esteemed profession at the time that was associated with males. And, of course, this is a profession that pays very handsomely, especially during this time period. So we can say that perhaps she's attracted to the profession because of money and because of prestige, but one of the deleted scenes that I'll be reviewing is when Asagai and she speak, and basically she talks about how she had a desire to cure, that it was more than just wanting prestige and more than just wanting money, that she wanted to help other individuals. That said, we also see how she searches for her cultural identity. She says she's resistant to assimilation, but yet so much of her behavior is assimilationist, especially in terms of her dating George Murchison. And her nickname, Benny, is a male name, again, because she seems to, be pursuing those activities that would be associated with the male. In other words, working, being independent. In fact, she says she might not even marry at one point, which would be quite revolutionary for the time. And we can see her also from a positive and a negative lens. We can see her as ambitious and educated and trying to achieve, but we can also see her as quite selfish as well. Think about some of her hobbies, and they include things such as photography and horseback riding. And just think about the kind of money that photography requires. Think about the kind of money horseback riding requires. And I think that horseback riding is particularly relevant because this takes place in the south side of Chicago. In other words, this is not a place where you would be riding horses. So in some ways, it's very frivolous. And again, we could say that perhaps is an illustration of her youth, and that she's trying out new things, as well she should. But we can also see this as perhaps an illustration of her selfishness. The way she tries out multiple hobbies is the way that she perhaps deals with men as well, as she's dealing with two extremes. Notice that Beneatha is indeed young, but the entire family is named the Younger family. We talked a little bit about this with Young Goodman Brown as well. All of the associations with being young, being innocent and naive, but also being full of energy and hope. And we see a little bit of both in this particular drama. Now, George Murchison, the first person that Beneatha is dating, and she freely admits that she doesn't have any serious intentions towards him. So again, we can see this as perhaps just a youthful experimentation, or we can see this as her perhaps taking advantage of a situation because she's quite aware that George Murchison has a good amount of money. So even though she doesn't necessarily care for him, she is enjoying the perks that come with dating him. And his name, Murchison, very deliberate because he is the son of a merchant's son. And they've made a good amount of money based on that. Again, the idea of what Walter wants to pursue, his own business. First name George. Again, think about famous Georges in the United States. Perhaps the most famous would be George Washington. But definitely very much a character that represents assimilation. He believes that the purpose of education is for making money. That scene always makes me very sad. And then Joseph Asagai, in many ways, is the exact opposite of George Murchison. And again, Beneatha is dating both of them at the same time. Notice that Joseph is an American name and Asagai is an African name, and how his character is able to merge or blend both cultures. And he encourages Beneatha's cultural identity and search for her background. In fact, he believes that the purpose of education is to help Africa. Again, this is a scene that is cut that I wanted to talk about, but notice the difference between him and George Murchison in that particular instance. And culture, it can be defined in its broadest sense as any kind of group membership. Usually we think about large cultural groups when we think about culture and with observable characteristics. So we think about things like age, and definitely generational conflict is an element in this play. Travis representing the most youthful and Mama all the way at the other extreme. Or we think about things like gender, and definitely this idea of male and female is present within the play, especially considering the stereotypes and conceptions of what that meant in 1959. Or we might think of ethnicity, and obviously this is about an African-American family, and we see prejudice directly confronting them. So when we think about culture, usually we talk about characteristics associated with culture, beliefs and values and behaviors. And behaviors are usually the easiest to spot because this is something that you can see. And behaviors oftentimes include things such as music. And think about how happy Beneatha is when she's able to get music from Africa, from Asagai, from the records that he brings to her. And at one point, she even talks about how she doesn't want to listen to this assimilation as junk anymore before she starts playing those records from Africa. Or it could also be clothing. And again, think about how happy Beneatha is to be able to get the wardrobe that Asagai sends for her from his own sister, no less. Again, showing his level of commitment to her. Other characters, Mr. Lindner. Notice he's given the title of Mr. and how often in the play we hear the you people as he's talking about the Younger family. Mr. is a title of respect. In a racist America, his welcoming committee is anything but welcoming, as we find out, despite his protests. And at one point, Beneatha says, 30 pieces and not more. And I wanted to make sure that you understood that. And when she's talking about pieces, she's talking about the money that was given to Judas, basically to betray Jesus. So a character that is oftentimes deleted, and certainly was in the Sidney Poitier version, is a neighbor by the name of Mrs. Wilhelmina Othello Johnson. And again, it's something that can be deleted without sacrificing plot, but I think it's important in terms of theme. And also, not only does it shorten the length of the play, but it also is a cost savings measure because you don't have to have an actor and an understudy and wardrobe and so forth. But her name is important as well. Johnson is a very common name. Her last name is Johnson. And in the scene that I'm going to be reading to you shortly, we'll see that even though she's a neighbor and a friend of the family's, she's not particularly happy that the family has an opportunity to improve their situation because of her jealousy and her pettiness. And that is an indicator perhaps of one of the other obstacles that the Younger family has to face. Not just people like the Lindners of the world and the welcoming committees of the world, but their own friends, their own neighbors. And if you notice, there's great reference to the bathroom in this particular play because multiple apartments would be sharing one bathroom. These were large residences that were divided up into smaller units so that landlords could make more profit. And this is why it's so difficult, again, to find bathroom time and why it's become such an issue. They're all sharing this bathroom, multiple families. So right from the beginning of the play, we see the anxiety associated with that. But that means that this family is also sharing the bathroom probably with Mrs. Wilhelmina Othello Johnson, but we will see that she's welcome into their home and has been there before. And the name Othello is the feminized version of Othello, which happens to be a Shakespeare play that directly confronts racism about a dark-skinned Moor, Othello, who basically, that's an African, who marries a fair-skinned Desdemona and the fallout that occurs because of it. And it turns out that Othello's best friend, Iago, is one of the biggest racists in the play and is intent on bringing about Othello's descent. And I won't give away too many spoilers about the play, but it shows just how contemporary some of Shakespeare's works are. In fact, it's one of the plays that I do in my Shakespeare class. But at any rate, when we talk about this character's name, Wilhelmina is the feminized version of William. And of course, William is the name of the playwright, William Shakespeare, who wrote Othello. So this is Lorraine Hansberry's wink and a nod to William Shakespeare's Othello when we get the neighbor of Mrs. Wilhelmina Othello Johnson. Bobo. And the name Bobo means idiot. And basically, Bobo entrusts all of the money to Willie. And of course, Willie runs off with it. Bobo's an idiot. Willie is a slang term for penis, and you might say that Willie is a real D-I-C-K, so to speak, who steals the money. Again, this is all very deliberate from Lorraine Hansberry's perspective. And oftentimes we don't think of this as a character because we are very human-centric, but I would argue that the plant is as important of a character as any of the other characters in the play, and that casting is quite important with this plant. We want to make sure that we have the right plant. It needs to look like something that is on the brink of death. It can't be something that's flourishing because the plant represents the family. The family is just barely surviving. Kept alive by mama's love, just like the plant is barely surviving. Kept alive by mama's love. The family is in too small of an apartment. The plant is in too small of a pot. The plant isn't getting enough sunshine. The family's not getting enough sunshine. So the family is looking for a place to have new roots to settle in. So is the plant. In fact, you could write an entire paper, if you so wanted to, about the significance of the plant and Raisin in the Sun. And even the title itself, A Raisin in the Sun. And this comes from a Lorraine Hansberry, or I'm sorry, this comes from a Langston Hughes poem, Harlem, that Lorraine Hansberry was inspired by. And even without knowing the poem, think about a raisin, which is a dried grape. In other words, it's had the moisture taken out of it, but it still is alive. We could say that that perhaps represents the family. But if we were to put that raisin in the sun would basically dehydrate that raisin to the point where it would no longer be edible. It would no longer be alive. It would no longer be able to offer nourishment. And it could be the same with the family as well, is that they are much like raisins. And think about the color imagery. Raisins are dark, and so is the family. The sun is light. We could perhaps compare that to the Lindners of the world if we wanted to use some color imagery and light skin. And this sense of, yes, the sun can give life, but too much of it can remove life as well. And This dried fruit imagery, you know, I think works so nicely with thinking about not just a raisin, but also think about raising. If you were to say raising and you dropped your G, if you were speaking quickly, for instance, you would say raisin. And this entire play is about raisins. Not necessarily the fruit, but raising family members as mama is trying to raise her sons, not S-U-N, but S-O-N. So there's a play on words there. And of course, Mama's sons are both Walter and Travis when you think about it. And of course, Walter is trying to raise his son. The whole play also is about trying to raise up or improve your station. If you know 1970s television, you might be familiar with a television show called The Jeffersons, which was, in some part, I believe, inspired by plays such as A Raisin in the Sun. Specifically, the Jeffersons happened to be about a family who owned a dry cleaning business and were rather affluent because of it. And think about George Murchison, who also is affluent in this play because he has a dry cleaning business. And in the opening credits and in the theme song, it talks about how the family is moving on up to the east side, to a deluxe apartment in the sky. And basically, this family is raising themselves up, much like this family is trying to raise themselves up. And of course, we can see that they're raising themselves up, not just economically, but at the end, we see how Walter is able to raise himself up emotionally and morally. We'll talk a little bit more about the ending and Walter's decision next class. And of course, next class isn't going to be Thursday. It'll be next Tuesday, which means that you've got an option for your second journal. So you know the second journal is going to be very similar to the first journal. The distinction being that the first journal was about short story. The second journal will be about drama. So I'm asking that you write approximately a page or so for Oedipus the King, approximately a page or so for Midsummer Night's Dream, and approximately a page or so finally for A Raisin in the Sun. And I evaluated informally, not for grammar or mechanics, just for content. And in theory, it would be ideal if you could submit that in today, Tuesday the 22nd at 11:59 p.m. To my email via PDF. And that would be Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu. I have no problem with you submitting in that journal, however, when we return back from Thanksgiving break. So that would be the 29th, which would be Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. So you get to decide whether to submit in the journal either before Thanksgiving or after Thanksgiving. Either is fine by me. But that said, in terms of thinking about the play, we won't be able to put closure onto the play until we return back from the Thanksgiving. So that might influence your decision if you're not quite sure yet what to write about. But I had indicated that I wanted to talk just a little bit about some of the scenes in the play. One of the things I love about Lorraine Hansberry is she's, again, such a self-conscious writer that even the stage directions are literary. And of course, if you were watching the play itself, you wouldn't be privy to the stage directions. But on page 23, for instance, we're told, and this is in Act 1, Scene 1, that the younger living room, these are in the stage directions, would have been comfortable and well-ordered if it were not for a number of indestructible contradictions. I'd say this entire play is about indestructible contradictions. It would be a wonderful paper topic, actually. And then the stage directions continue. Its furnishings are typical and undistinguished. Their primary feature now is that they've clearly had to accommodate the living of too many people for too many years, and they are tired. And I love the personification of the furniture to illustrate the state of the family as well, that the furniture is just as tired as the family. Another scene I wanted to draw your attention to, this is on page 58 to 59 in my version that I had ordered for the class. And notice that I can't refer to this play by act, scene, and line the way I would with a Shakespeare play because it's not divided into lines. Also, we can't refer to act, scene, and line for Oedipus the King because we're reading a translation. So it would always be different depending on the translation. It's only when we get to Shakespeare that there's a universality, and Renaissance drama as a whole from Britain, where things are divided into act scene lines so we don't have to rely on page number. But now I've got to rely on page number, and at least in my version, page 58 or so. And this is when Beneatha and Ruth are speaking to one another, and this is where Ruth is indicating that she's pregnant, and Beneatha is asking, well, where is this baby going to live? Is he going to live on the roof? That there's no room. The scene that's cut is that there's a sudden commotion from the street, and Beneatha goes to the window, and she sticks her head out, and she calls out, Travis, Travis, what are you doing down there? And then she sees, oh, Lord, they're chasing a rat. And, of course, they yell for Travis to come upstairs, and Travis does. And these are the stage directions for Travis. Excited and full of narrative, coming directly to his mother. This is on page 59 for me. Mama, you should have seen the rat. Big as a cat, honest. And he shows an exaggerated size with his hands. Golly, that rat was really cutting, and Bubber caught him with his heel, and the janitor, Mr. Barnett, got him with a stick, and then they got him in a corner, and bam, 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 and he was just jumping around and bleeding like everything, too. And there's rat blood all over the street. Just to illustrate how dire the situation is for this family, this play is very much about the American dream and trying to achieve the American dream. Part of the American dream is having the house with the white picket fence, with the 2.3 children, so to speak, and the backyard for those kids to play in with their puppy. Travis doesn't have a backyard. Travis is playing in the street. Travis isn't playing with a puppy. He's playing with a rat. He is very likely not to even be able to have a sibling because Ruth is contemplating abortion because they literally can't afford another child. So, at this particular point, what I wanted to do was to talk a little bit about Mrs. Johnson and that very important scene, in my opinion, on page 99, when their neighbor comes to visit them. And what we're told about her in the stage directions, this is important so that we can understand as audience if we are reading this play, but this is also important for the actor so they can understand how to play the role. Mrs. Johnson is a woman who decided long ago to be enthusiastic about everything in life. She's inclined to wave her wrist vigorously at the height of her exclamatory comments. Hello there yourself. How are you this evening, Ruth? And Ruth, in her stage direction, not much of a deceptive type, fine, Miss Johnson. And then Miss Johnson says fine and reaches out playfully and pats Ruth's stomach and says, ain't you starting to poke out none yet? Miss Johnson mugs with delight at the overfamiliar remark. Her eyes dart around looking at the crates and packing preparation. Mama's face is a cold sheet of endurance. Oh, ain't we getting ready round here, though? Yes, sir. Look at there. I'm telling you, the youngers is really getting on ready to move on up a little higher. Bless God. And Mama also says, bless God, a little dryly, downing the total sincerity of the blesser. And Miss Johnson says, he's good, ain't he? And Mom says, oh, yes, he's good. And Johnson says, I mean, sometimes he works in mysterious ways, but he works, doesn't he? And Mama says, yes, he does. And then Miss Johnson says, I'm just so happy for y'all. And this here child looks like she could just about pop open with happiness. She looks at Ruth. Where's all the rest of the family? And Mama says, Benny's gone to bed. And Johnson says, ain't no. And the stage direction has the implication is pregnancy. Ain't no sickness done hit you, I hope. And Mama says, no, she's just tired. She was out this evening. And Miss Johnson, all in a coo. Aw, ain't that lovely? She's still going out with that little Murchison boy? And Mama dryly says, mm-hmm. And Johnson says, that's lovely. You sure got lovely children, younger. Me and Isaiah talks about all the time about what fine children you were blessed with. And then Mama asks Ruth to give Miss Johnson a piece of sweet potato pie. And Miss Johnson says, oh, honey, I can hardly stay a minute. I just dropped in to see if there was anything I could do. But she accepts the food easily. I guess you all seen the news all over the colored paper this week. Mama says, no, didn't get mine this week. Johnson, lifting her head and blinking with the spirit of catastrophe. You mean you ain't read about them colored people that was bombed out of their place out there? And then Ruth straightens with concern and takes the paper and reads it. Johnson notices it and feeds commentary. And Johnson says, ain't it something how bad these here white folks is getting here in Chicago? Lord, getting so you think you're right down in Mississippi. And the stage direction is with a tremendous and rather insincere sense of melodrama. Of course, I think it's wonderful how our folks keep on pushing on out. You hear how some Negroes around here talking about how they don't go where they ain't wanted and all that. Not me, honey. Stage direction is, this is a lie. Wilhelmina Othello Johnson goes anywhere, anytime she feels like it, with head movement for emphasis, stage direction. Yes, I do. Why, if we left it up to these here crackers, the poor N's would have nothing. And of course, she uses the N word here. She clasps her hand over her mouth. Oh, I always forget you don't allow that word in your house. And Mama, quietly looking at her, says, no, I don't. And Johnson vigorously again says, me neither. I was just telling Isaiah yesterday, when he come using it in front of me, I say, Isaiah, just like Miss Younger says all the time. And then Mama asks, do you want some more pie? And Johnson says, no, thank you. This was lovely. I got to get on home and have my midnight coffee. I hear some people say, don't let them sleep, but I find I can't close my eyes, right? Lesson, unless I done had my last cup of coffee. My good night coffee, I call it. And she waits undaunted. And Mama with much eye-rolling and communication between herself and Ruth. Ruth, why don't you give Miss Johnson some coffee? And Miss Johnson says, where's brother tonight? And Mama says, he's lying down. And Johnson says, he sure gets his beauty rest, don't he? Good-looking man. Sure is a good-looking man. She reaches out, pats Ruth's stomach again. I guess that's how come we come on having babies around here. And then she winks at Mama. One thing about brother, he always know how to have a good time. He's so ambitious. I bet it was his idea, y'all moving on out. Clybourne Park. And I bet this time next month, y'all names will be in the papers plenty. And then she holds up her hands to mark off each word of the headline. Negroes invade Clybourne Park. Bombed. And Mama, she and Ruth look at the woman in amazement. Well, we ain't exactly moving out there to get bombed. And Johnson says, oh, honey, I'm praying to God every day. Nothing like that happen. But, you have to think of life like it is. These here Chicago Peckerwoods, some bad Peckerwoods. And Mama says, we done thought all about that, Miss Johnson. And then Mama says that wearily. Benita comes out of the bedroom and her robe passes through to the bathroom. Miss Johnson says, hello there, Benny. And Benita says crisply, hello, Mrs. Johnson. And Johnson asks, how's school? And Benita says, fine, thank you. She goes out. And Johnson insults and says, getting so she don't have much to say to nobody. And Mama says, that child was on her way to the bathroom. And Johnson says, I know, but sometimes she act like she ain't got the time to pass the day with nobody, ain't been to college. Well, I ain't criticizing her none. It's just, how some of our young people get when they get a little education. Yes, well, I guess I better get on home. And the stage direction is unmoving. Of course, I understand how she must be proud and everything, being the only one in the family to make something of herself. I know just being a chauffeur ain't ever satisfied brother none. He feels like that, though. Ain't nothing wrong. He shouldn't feel like that, though. Ain't nothing wrong with being a chauffeur. And Mama says there's plenty wrong. And she says, Mama, my husband always said being any kind of a servant wasn't a fit thing for a man to have to be. He always said a man's hands was made to make things or to turn the earth with, not to drive nobody's car or and then she looks at her own hands. Carry the slop jars. My boy's just like him. He wasn't meant to wait on nobody. And Miss Johnson, rising somewhat offended. You youngers are too much for me. You're sure one proud acting bunch of colored folks. Well, I always think like Booker T. Washington said that time. Education has spoiled many a plowhand. And Mama says, is that what old Booker T said? Johnson said, he sure did. Mama says, well, sounds just like him, the fool. And Johnson indignantly says, well, he was one of our great men. Mama says, who says so? And Johnson, nonplussed, me and you ain't never agreed about some things, Lena Younger. I guess I better be going. And Ruth quickly says, good night. And Johnson says, good night. And then she says, you can keep the paper. Night. And then Mama says, good night, Miss Johnson. And then Benita comes out and says, Mama, if there are two things we as a people have got to overcome, one is the Ku Klux Klan, the other is Mrs. Johnson. The idea that, again, they are facing obstacles not just from outsiders, but from within their own community, because obviously Mrs. Johnson is not happy about the fact that the Youngers are going to be improving their situation. On page 108, Walter, very short scene that we don't see in the film version with Poitier, is talking with Travis. And he asks Travis what it is that Travis wants to do when he becomes an adult. And Travis says he wants to be a bus driver. And Walter says, that ain't nothing to be because it's not big enough. And then he says, you know what, Travis? This is on page 108. In 7 years, you're going to be 17 years old. Things going to be very different with us in 7 years, Travis. One day when you're 17, I'll come home from my office downtown somewhere. Travis says, you don't work in no office, Daddy. And he says, no, but after tonight, after what your daddy going to do tonight, there's going to be offices, a whole lot of them. And Travis asks, what you going to do tonight, Daddy? He says, you wouldn't understand yet, son, but your daddy's going to make a transaction. A business transaction that's going to change our lives. That's how come one day when you're about 17 years old, I'll come home. I'll be pretty tired, you know what I mean? After a day of conferences and secretaries getting things wrong the way they do. Because an executive's life is hell, man. And I'll pull the car up on the driveway. Just a plain black Chrysler, I think, with white walls. Not black tires. More elegant. Rich people don't have to be flashy. They'll have to get something a little sportier for Ruth. Maybe a Cadillac convertible. And I'll come onto the steps, and the gardener will be clipping away at the hedges, and he'll say, good evening, Mr. Younger. And I'll say, hello, Jefferson. How are you this evening? And I'll go inside, and Ruth will come downstairs and meet me at the door, and we'll kiss each other. She'll take my arm. We'll go up to your room and see you sitting on the floor with the catalogs of all the great schools in America around you. All the great schools in the world. And I'll say, all right, son, it's your 17th birthday. What is it you decided? Just tell me where you want to go to school, and you'll go. Just tell me what it is you want to be, and you'll be it. Whatever you want to be, yes, sir. I hand you the world. And as selfish and self-centered as Walter is, we can't help but admire that he is hopeful that he can make a better life for his son. In fact, that's part of the American dream, to improve each generation. And then the section that I was mentioning about Benita, talking with the Sagai about why it was she wanted to be a doctor. And she says on page 132, when I was small, we used to take our sleds out in the wintertime, and the only hills we had with the ice-covered stone steps of some houses down the street. We used to fill them in with snow and make them smooth, slide down them all day. It's very dangerous, you know, far too steep. And sure enough, one day a kid named Rufus came down too fast, hit the sidewalk. We saw his face split open right there in front of us. And I remember standing there looking at his bloody open face thinking, well, that was the ending of Rufus. But the ambulance came and they took him to the hospital and they fixed the broken bones and they sewed it all up. And the next time I saw Rufus, he had just a little line down the middle of his face. And I never got over that. That was what one person could do for another. Fix him up, sew up the problem, make him all right again. It was the most marvelous thing in the world. I wanted to do that. I always thought it was the one concrete thing in the world that a human could do. Fix up the sick, you know. I wanted to cure, is what she says. And again, as selfish as she can be, we can't help but admire her desire to cure and help others. And Asagai, shortly thereafter on page 135, talks about his goals for Africa. And he says, in my village at home, it's the exceptional man who can even read a newspaper or ever sees a book at all. I will go home and much of what I will have to say will seem strange to the people of my village. But I will teach and work and things will happen, slowly and swiftly. At times it will seem that nothing changes at all. And then again, the sudden dramatic changes. And then again, the sudden dramatic events which make history leap into the future. And then quiet again, retrogression even. Guns, murder, revolution. And I even will have moments when I wonder if the quiet was not better than all the death and hatred. But I will look about my village at the illiteracy and disease and ignorance, and I won't wonder long. And perhaps I'll be a great man. Perhaps I will hold on to, I just lost my place. And perhaps I will hold on to the substance of truth and find my way always with the right course. Perhaps for it I will be butchered in my bed some night by the servants of the empire. Or perhaps I shall live to be a very old man, respected and esteemed in my new nation. And perhaps I shall hold office. And this is what I'm trying to tell you, Elio. Perhaps the things I believe now for my country will be wrong and outmoded. And I will not understand and do terrible things to have things my way, or merely to keep my power. Don't you see there will be young men and women, not British soldiers then, but my own black countrymen, to step out of the shadows some evening and slit my then useless throat? Don't you see they've always been there, and they always will be, and that such a thing as my own death will be in advance? They who might kill me even might actually replenish all that I was. So that gives you an idea of some of the deleted scenes. What I wanted to talk about next class was that poem, Harlem, A Dream Deferred, as well as the sense of the American dream and how it is examined in this play, and some of the major themes and issues. So I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. No attendance question today. Happy Thanksgiving. And I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.